Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be here in Reykjavik this afternoon with you. On my way from the airport, the taximan said, "I hope you don't have to talk about Brexit. We're sick of hearing about it in Iceland." I said, "If you think you're sick of hearing about it, can you imagine what we think about it in Ireland?" Just as an introduction, Timmy Dooley is my name. I'm a member of the Irish Parliament. I'm a vice president of my own party, the Fianna Fáil, which is the main opposition party, and I'm also a vice president of ALDE, which your party has recently joined. We're obviously delighted that you have taken that decision, and we look forward to working with you to developing a much more close relationship in assisting you in your work here. I've been asked to talk to you today about Europe and the impact it has on an individual country. So I'm very much here to share with you my experience rather than telling you how you should do your business. I think we all accept that we need to adjust the microphone, apparently. It's the Brexiteers again. Good, can everybody hear? So yeah, I'm always conscious that when you speak in another jurisdiction that you don't seek to lecture or simplify issues that exist in individual countries. So it's very much to share with you some of the thoughts, some of the experiences that I, as an Irish citizen in the first instance and a European citizen, and from a political perspective as well. So. First question really is, what's in it for me? What's in it for the citizen? And if I trace back a little bit to my birth, I was born in 1969, just turned 50 this year, and was born into a country that wasn't part of a bloc like we currently are. And you look back now and you see the extent to which our entire lifestyle has changed for the better. We just pick a few areas. Ireland was a relatively small, inward-looking economy, socially inward-looking, Catholic country, focused on and connected and driven by a Catholic ethos, and the impact that had on a society. I grew up on a small farm, and looking back and to see the way in which my father's business was run. Effectively had to take the price that the British market provided us with. So whilst we were an independent nation, we were somewhat isolated and very much dependent on the will, if you want, of our nearest neighbour, and that evolved over 800 years, if you want, of conflict and cooperation, I suppose, at times with the British. When we joined the European Union in 1973, it was the beginning of the end of that dependence on our nearest neighbour. It opened up vast opportunities for us, much of which perhaps wasn't seen at the time, but it had to, there were clearly opportunities. So if you want then to look at the kind of benefits that we have achieved from that, just in economic terms, we opened up access to that vast market that is the European Union and has grown and developed since. It gave an outlet for our agricultural produce and has allowed us to develop a much more resilient and a much more buoyant agriculture sector. We've been able to grow our farms, improve our productivity, and that has worked well. But in addition to that, we've been able to grow a food industry and a food sector around that in the processing of our agricultural produce, and that has retained an awful lot of our citizens who now able to get work, or heretofore would have had to emigrate to the United States, which there was a very significant history of, and to Britain and further afield. But being able to keep your people at home, allowing you then to develop our education system, develop the universities around the areas of food technologies, and see all the benefits, and we've seen all the benefits that has flown from that. We've also seen very significant social change, and I mentioned that at the outset, that we're very much seen as a Catholic country. It's surprising to some who wouldn't follow Irish politics to see that we're one of the first countries in the world to embrace same-sex marriage and to pass laws in support of that. Just last year, we changed our constitution to provide for abortion. So you can see over the lifetime of our membership of the European Union, that opening up of our markets in the first instance, opening up the country generally, greater level of travel and movement of people, which are at the core of the European project. It has benefited a small, isolated economy and country like ours that we have seen as a society, that we have grown, become more tolerant, become more open, and embraced the modern way of life. So from that point of view, the impact has been phenomenal, and one which I think perhaps isn't as widely recognised as others. And yes, we have benefited in the early stages from our membership of the European Union at that stage, through the cohesion funds to assist us in developing our infrastructure, roads and rail, our water treatment systems, and all that goes with it, which now has moved us to a point, and I was interested in the discussion that was, didn't understand it, but I certainly knew what you were talking about in terms of the environment. We would now see ourselves as moving towards taking a leadership role from a climate change perspective, and our preservation and management of the environment. And much of that has come from sharing of knowledge and information as part of our role in the European Union. So that's what's in it, I suppose, from the individual's perspective. We've been able to create much more employment at home. We've been able to sell goods and services overseas into the market that the European Union has provided us with. We have become a location for significant inward investment from a foreign direct perspective, principally to the United States and amongst some of the large multinationals. For those of you that have visited Ireland, you will see effectively all the top tech and pharma companies having major global presence in and around our capital city. And that's principally because of our relationship with and our membership of the European Union. We being an English-speaking language, or an English-speaking country, has been helpful. Our education system adapted with the support of the European institutions through support for science and technology research. We've adapted very well to assist in that job creation, and therefore, as a result, we're attractive on the inward investment point of view. So we've developed very significantly there. And then people say, okay, so that's what you've gained. What have you lost? What is it that you've lost? And people talk about loss of sovereignty, loss of independence. We're not the same anymore. We don't have the control that we have. Well, I'd love if my dad was here, because he's 90, and he'd tell you what sovereignty meant prior to the European Union. What control meant? Nothing. We were dependent on the British. We took what they gave us. We gave what they took. We took the price they provided us with. So we weren't really independent. And at the end of the day, when you look at what the fundamentals of the European Union really are, it's about getting away from this isolationist approach. It's about breaking down the barriers. It's often said, it's a bit of a cliche at this stage, but that the European project was the greatest peace project of all time. It was about resolving issues around a table rather than at the other end of the bullet or the bomb or the gun. And that has been hugely successful. We've seen the assistance of the European Union in assisting with the transition from conflict in the northern part of our country to the peace process that we have today. It's flawed. We still have a long way to go, but the European Union played a very significant role in keeping Britain at the table through those difficult days. So you've got to look at what you're gaining rather than this idea of losing something. That what is it you're losing? It's not about losing sovereignty. It's about pooling sovereignty. It's about sharing sovereignty, and it's about reaping the benefits from breaking down those barriers. Now, at this current sort of last couple of years, and as we face into the next European election, there is a challenge to Europe, and it's a challenge to those of us that have a liberal outlook on life and on the world to take on this nationalism, populism that's starting to emerge on the Eastern Front. There's reasoning behind it, for sure. The migration issue has forced some of these isolationist policies, has given them something to campaign against. But it's absolutely incumbent on those of us that believe in a different way to fight our corner at elections, and not just do as we have done for the previous 30 years, kind of take it for granted that, you know, once the European project was started, that it's going to continue almost autonomously. We've got those of us who believe in the values of the European Union, believe in the liberal values of the European Union, have a continuous job in espousing those principles and those values. And I can see by your being here today, that's what you're about. You're trying to get that message out there, rather than let the sort of populist and populism that is so easy from a rhetoric point of view to get people behind you, and the damage that ultimately that kind of populism and that kind of extreme nationalism, the damage that can do not just to the Union, but do to individual countries as well. So we've got to continue to, I suppose, give energy and continue to promote the positive benefits. And we'd seen that a little bit in my country when on 2 occasions we failed to pass 2 important treaties, the Nice Treaty and the Lisbon Treaty. Now, because of the way our constitution is written, anytime there's any significant changes required through the treaties, we've got to go back to the people to seek their support. Now, we've found in the past that, you know, people bring forward extraneous reasons not to support the passage of the legislation or the passage of the referenda. In many cases, it's just people trying to undermine the European Union for a belief that somehow they're better, we're better on our own. Time and time again, that has proven to be the wrong way to go. And we shouldn't lose sight of as well. I was recently looking at one of the Eurobarometer surveys that, notwithstanding what's happening in some countries, you know, in Italy and in France, in Poland and Hungary, around that re-emergence of nationalism, when you look across the Union and you do the surveys, there is now a very strong support for the Union, in fact, probably higher than anywhere in the last 25 years. I think one of the studies that I looked at talked about a belief that being part of the European Union is good for the individual country, stands at about 62%. And this is the highest figure in about 25 years. And I think about 68% of respondents indicated that they felt it had been good for their individual country. Now, when you go to Ireland, it rates a little bit higher than that. I mean, I think it's about 85% believing that it was a good thing to be part of the Union, and 92% believed that we had benefited. I'm surprised that it's as low as 92%. I would have thought it would have been close to 99% of people that would have seen the significant benefits of the Union. So the challenge continues to be there for us to fight our corner and explain from a political perspective. Now, as I said, during the better years of the Union, where it's growing and expanding and developing and all the positives that are coming, there's always, in any compromise, there's the potential for some negative. Let's be honest. If we're all to reach agreement around certain things, you know, you're not going to get everything that you want all of the time. And from an Irish perspective, and other countries have done the same politically, we have often taken the easy option by blaming Europe. That's being foisted on us by Europe, and that has helped to build up some negative imagery or negative connotations, rather than explaining, you know, for the greater good of the European Union, for the greater good of mankind, we've got to change. And that's happening, if you want, in terms of climate change and some of the targets that have been agreed under the Kyoto Protocols, and also at the Paris Agreement in 2015. That has put very onerous targets with significant potential for fines on us about getting our energy mix right, moving away from fossil fuels, moving much more towards renewable energy. But I see that as a good thing. I see that as a really positive thing, because I can see the impact of climate change. I can see it in the farming community that I come from. I can see the erosion issues along the western seaboard, along the southeastern seaboard. I can see the very significant changes in weather patterns that's affecting farming. You know, wet summers, very significant rainfall at the wrong time of the year, if you want, and then significant dry spells that's impacting on farmers' ability to capture the crops that are needed to get their cattle through the winter. So why wouldn't you take the approach that would help to address that? And of course it has a much wider impact. It has the potential to assist third world countries in playing our role in assisting them in their development, rather than forcing them to continue to see hotter weather, greater amount of drought and increased starvation. Of course you'd want to do that too, but even if you just took this isolationist, independent, nationalist perspective, you'd see the benefits too to addressing the climate change mix. So I think it's a requirement on us to understand the benefits, the broader benefits of working collectively together. We benefit in terms of the access to the markets. We benefit in terms of becoming more efficient in how we do things. The competitive environment that the market provides for us makes us leaner and fitter, and ensures that we don't end up with sort of the legacy industries at the past, where you're doing it too long to stop, and then ultimately you hit a crash environment, and the next numerous generations suffer. So I think being part of the European Union has kept that continuous evolution and the continuous change within our economy, and that has been hugely beneficial to us. Just in terms of the membership of the ALDE party, as you know, there are currently 67 member parties across 45 countries. So that's a very good forum in which to work and collaborate and to foster new ideas. The forthcoming EU elections, we see great opportunity to develop a bulwark against that extreme nationalism that's emerging, and we believe at the end of the electoral cycle, based on our current projections, that potentially ALDE, together with En Marche, will have somewhere between 90 and 100 MEPs. That will be a significant growth from where we're currently at. We have 67 members of the current Parliament, and when you take that increased numbers with a reducing Parliament as a result of my nearest neighbours wanting out, the Parliament will now be just 705 members. So we would see ALDE as being a very significant platform for change after the next election. In many cases, well, it has been the fourth largest party. We see that changing. We're hoping to become even bigger, as I said, with greater influence. And I think you will, for those of you that follow European politics, you will have seen our leader in the European Parliament really taking a major leadership role around the whole Brexit debate. That has been Guy Verhofstadt, who on behalf of the EU Parliament has been acting as the rapporteur in those discussions and negotiations. So that's my few thoughts in the early stages. So what I propose to do now is to open up to the floor to take questions or comments that you might have, and at this stage I'll gladly talk about Brexit or answer any questions that you might have in that regard, or anything else that you think I have missed, or anything else that you'd like to get some of my thoughts or comments on. So there are microphones on either end of the room, so if you want to make your way towards either of them, and we'll give you an opportunity to
Hi Timmy, very nice to meet you. My name is Christopher, we met earlier. Just thank you for coming. It was a very insightful talk, and it's always good to hear perspectives from full EU members. First of all, just congratulations on your referendum on abortion and women's rights. It was very heartfelt to also witnessed the Home to Vote initiative. I just wanted to ask you, because that is a very contentious referendum back in Ireland, about how European enthusiasts in Iceland could maybe learn from how that came to be. How did such a contentious referendum finally take place in Ireland? And because everyone here has been fighting for quite some time to get a referendum on the European Union in Iceland. So I just wanted to ask you kind of how the process was and what we could learn from it. And once again, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you very much. In the referendum, I take it you're talking about the one on abortion? Yes. And women's rights. Well, I suppose there were a few people who, for a couple of generations, had continued to fight a lonely battle. It became more mainstream as a result of a number of high-profile cases, one in particular where an Indian doctor had died as a result of being unable to procure the termination of a pregnancy when she had reached a point in labour where her life was at risk. And it became very clear that our laws were overly restrictive. And I think at that stage, the politicians on all sides sat down and said, you know, for once and for all, we've got to address this issue, notwithstanding a belief based on a previous referendum that, you know, this was a sacrosanct issue and that the Irish people didn't want to visit it. Now, of course, you could view the Irish, it's often said about the Irish solution to the Irish problem. We didn't have abortion services or facilities in Ireland, but we had Irish abortion. We had Irish termination of pregnancy because we could get on a boat or a plane and be in London within an hour or 2 hours and procure a termination of a pregnancy there, as you know, somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 women did every year. So as the politicians started to talk about it in Parliament, the people started to talk about it in the pubs and in the streets and in the clubs and in the general walk of life. And when you get that level of public debate, people started to question what it was they were against. And were they against something that was already happening? Yes, it clearly was. It wasn't the same 5,000 women that were crossing the Irish Sea every 9 or 10 months to terminate a pregnancy. So clearly, every family in the country had experience of this issue. So it was about beginning the conversation. And as the conversations emerged and people started to talk about it, they began to see the foolishness, if you want, of this isolationist approach. And like everything, when debate starts, people start to tell their own stories. The issue around fatal fetal abnormalities and the really devastating impact that had on families and what they had to go through to procure a termination. So it was really about beginning the debate and then letting society understand and see how things had changed in the minds. The Catholic Church no longer had the same level of control, largely because of the evolution of life and interest, and some of the issues within the Catholic Church in terms of their own problems that they've had in relation to women and children. I think people actually growing up for a change and realizing that they could do things on their own and they could think for themselves. And there was an overwhelming majority that changed the law, and that's been really positive. But I trace a lot of that conversation and debate back to us being part of the European Union, the way our labour laws had changed. Like when my mother got married, she was a nurse. She had to give up her job. That was a requirement. That wasn't before she was pregnant, but such were the laws in Ireland that if and when a woman married, she had to give up her state job. Now, that had changed before we joined the European Union. That hadn't changed before we joined the European Union, but our labour laws required an awful lot more change. So greater participation, equal pay for equal work. We still have, I think Europe still has a way to go to that, because you do look at some surveys and you see that women are still paid less, even within and across the various different professions. But that's under scrutiny and it's under observation, so that has been helpful there. Another question?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Loisa. Thank you for being with us. It was very interesting to hear your speech. I am thinking of the upcoming parliament election in May, if I remember correctly. And I'm interested in hearing what are going to be your main emphasis in that election. And I hear a lot of news of Steve Bannon's efforts to organize the right, the nationalists in Europe. Is that something that you've seen? And if so, what are you doing to counter that measure?
Yeah, but just from our own perspective, from an Irish point of view, we haven't seen the same level of the growth in nationalism, but it is an issue for ALDE, and obviously we're putting a lot of energy and a lot of effort into campaigning in the countries where we see that growth of nationalism. Our analysis of those parties, if you want, those populist parties at the minute, they don't necessarily have a clear connection. They share some of the same ideology, if that's what you could call it, but whether or not they will amass and amalgamate as a bloc at the end is not entirely sure. So from our point of view, it's putting our resources and our effort in with our respective parties in the countries where the greatest threat exists, and campaigning back to the basic principles of what the European Union means to citizens, the importance of it, what the impact of a diminished European Union would mean, how working in isolation will have a negative impact on economic activity. And we have to challenge too, to a greater extent, the leaders of those countries, particularly in Poland and Hungary. And it will be incumbent on the European Union and the parties, I speak about the EPP in particular, of which, in the case of the Hungarian leader being part of, these people are going to have to be shown a cold shoulder with then the political system in Europe, because they cannot continue to undermine the rule of law, undermine the rights of citizens, undermine migration policy, undermine the role of the NGOs, and to do so, and undermine the rights of the LGBT community, and to do so and not be challenged or sanctioned for it. And that's a requirement and an onus that rests on the main political parties. And as we're campaigning through the coming months, that we highlight these issues in a very direct way, and we challenge them, and we challenge the leaders that espouse that kind of a Europe, and we point out how negative and destructive that will be. And what we're doing from an ALDE perspective, rather than having one lead candidate fight the campaign for us, we're going to have a team of about 8 leaders. So within the various different jurisdictions, they will be responsible for campaigning in those areas and challenging in a very real way with the knowledge, with the local knowledge and experience, to take on these, what I would see as people who are misguided, don't have the interest of the broader European citizenry at heart. And I would argue, notwithstanding their elevation or election within their own countries, I don't believe they have the interest of the citizens of their country truly at heart either. Any other questions?
Yes, thank you. My name is Dora Tines. I had similar thoughts as Lovisa, but I would be interested in your views on when we talk about populism and the rise in nationalism. We see that in Europe, those who have been most inflicted politically are the Social Democrats. So Social Democrats have been really suffering in politics as a result. Now, have the Social Democrats done any identifiable mistakes that Liberal Democrats can learn from?
I haven't seen the mistakes that necessarily will affect them in the short term, because that's always the issue with populism. you succeed in bringing people with you. You take the examples of migration. So people who are concerned about their employment, about their own welfare, about jobs in their economy. Somebody that then moves forward and expresses a control, if you want, the necessity to control the flow of immigration. They do so, and people kind of chime with that at a particular time. I think if we just hold firm and hold solid, you know, there's a cycle there that we've got to watch for. I don't think we should overreact. I think we just go back to the base principles of what it is the European Union's platform was, what our ideals were, what our vision is, and how that has stood the test of time. For sure, countries go through difficult phases, whether it's a financial crash, and we know all about that in Ireland, and our relationship with as members of the European Union has stood us solid. We've bounced back, and we're now one of the fastest growing economies in the Union. So it's about sort of, I think, demonstrating to the citizens of a country that's going through that wave of populism that, you know, there is another way. Just because there's a crisis or there's a problem, you know, the reaction can't be to close your door and look inwards. It's hold firm to the ideals that have gotten you to where you are, have gotten the Union to where it is, and continue to hold solid. And that's why it's really important that the centre would hold, rather than, you know, this rush to. It's no different to any crisis in a family anywhere. You know, sudden reaction never gets you out of the mess that you're in. Hold firm to the ideals, and I think that's really the role that we're going to have to play as an ALDE party. Believe in the principles of the free market. Believe in the liberal policies and principles as a way through it.
Thank you very much. My name is Baldur Petersson, and thanks for excellent presentation. It has been very interesting to see the development in Ireland after the financial crisis, and how quick the country recovered. Indeed, much faster and of a greater scale than Iceland. And that is the basic of my questions, because in Iceland we are just roughly 300,000. You are 6 million. And if that is saying something, if you would have such a currency that we have, you would have 20 currencies, approximately. So the discussion about the currency in Iceland is rather shallow and emotional most of the time. And my question is regarding when you joined the European Union, the euro. What did people say about the currency and the euro? Was the currency in Ireland so emotional? Was it like the Queen or something, very national? Some kind of moment. Is there any tips that you can give us here in Iceland? How can we develop these kind of discussion to get out of this emotional and shallow discussion?
Yeah, the last part of your question, I'm slow to advise, but I'll give you the benefit of our experience. You know, our currency was pegged to the British pound, so again, we weren't an independent country. We had our own pound, but in essence, we were pegged there. Yeah, I suppose if you wanted to trace back the root of our financial crash, you could trace it back to joining the euro, because you know that effectively allowed us to borrow allowed our banks to borrow significantly on the international markets. We got a supply of cheap credit, if you want. Our banking section of our economy grew very significantly, and interest rates plummeted. That had a major destabilizing impact on our economy, and we suffered for that. I suppose we had monetary union and we didn't have banking union, so there were different banking rules across the union. So therefore, you didn't have you just didn't have that coherence. You know, I think the union has learned from that, and you know that saw banks failing in Ireland and not an appropriate resolution mechanism to deal with it. And that characterized the financial crisis for us. But again, you know, we've rebound from that, and the principles of the marketplace have benefited well. So point that I keep making about all of this, you go through a difficult period of time, but if the fundamentals are right, you'll get back to recovery. There are, I mean, you've different issues in relation to your currency, and obviously as you move towards, if that's what you ultimately do in joining the European Union, you'll have to make yourself very comfortable that it's the right thing for you to do on the currency side. But there's so much more that you can do in terms of just access to the market that I think will benefit you, even if you decided not to be part of the single currency. Now I've got 4 minutes left, so I'll take a couple of quick questions.
Hi, thank you. My name is Brandur Karlsson. First of all, thank you for your presentation. I would like to ask you about the influence of smaller parties within the European Parliament. Like, could I get your take on the Spitzenkandidat process? And do the smaller parties like ALDI have any chance of getting the Commission presidency? Yeah. Could we, for example, see someone like Margrethe Vestager as the next Commission president?
Yeah, it's very possible. I think, you know, the good thing about ALDI, whilst we're the 4th largest, we're very dynamic and open to building alliances with others. And I think you will have a more fragmented parliament at the end of this. I certainly don't think that the EPP will control the 2 top jobs at the end, either President of the Council and President of the Commission. So I think there's a game on there from an ALDE perspective, and I would be hopeful. We chose not to go down the Spitzencandidate route, and that, I think, gives us flexibility. I think the EPP have picked somebody who wasn't a Prime Minister, and I think that's certainly going to affect him. Certainly, I think ALDE will have a much greater role at the after the next election, just because of sheer numbers, and our association with En Marche will put us in a strong position. So I'm very hopeful that we will have one of those positions, and certainly Margrethe Vestager certainly may be a key player in that, but I don't want to jinx her chances by by suggesting she's going to be there from the start. Another question over here.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for your speech, and it's a privilege to listen to you. I was wondering, because many of the benefits of being in the EU were only realized after you entered the EU, so how were the voters in Ireland convinced of entering in the first place?
They weren't. They weren't initially, but I think they recognised. I think perhaps in the early 70s, and it's probably not unique to Ireland, citizens put more trust and faith in their politicians. And I think, with the exception of one political party, the 3-party system, it's become more fragmented since. But two of the 3 main political parties were advocating, because we're people who saw the benefits of developing our economy. You know, we didn't have we weren't an industrialized nation. We were principally, an agricultural base, exporting into the UK. And I think the political leaders at the time saw the benefits of the marketplace. And, you know, we were back, it was the European Economic Community then, it gone back to the old coal and steel before that. But we saw as a huge opportunity for us to trade in our agricultural produce, because we were producing, at that stage, much more than we were consuming. And that has developed apace. Today, 90% of our agricultural produce is exported. Now, we still export 50% of that into the United Kingdom, which has issues for us around Brexit. But I think a dependence on the advice, if you want, of the political leaders of the time would have brought people, and I think they, by and large, have recognised that was the right decision. That third political party has since come on board and is a strong advocate of the European Union. Is there one other question?
I'll make this a quick
Okay, we'll
one.
do a quick one.
On the subject of populism, as we know, the radical right-wing populism is on the rise, and that has some sort of effect of voters' demand for recognition because they feel their natural and cultural identities being threatened, and economic interest, job security, etc. In our era of modernization and globalization. So we know that this problem won't go away and will only increase in size. I know that ALDE, being a party of liberalism and pluralism, which is some sort of antithesis of populism, so I know that you have some sort of idea to combat this. But my question is, because it's becoming such a problem, is there some sort of coalition between these European parties which see this populism as a big threat, and what do you see in the future?
Yeah, we see it as a threat, which is why we're rightly energized and engaged in continuing to promote the ideals of what liberalism is, and reminding people of the benefits to it. In addition to that, as I said earlier, it's vitally important that we challenge those countries that are drifting in that way, and that Europe, the European Union, the European project, doesn't provide a safe haven for the Viktor Orbáns of the world, and that we engage more fulsome and more quickly in sanctioning these countries, because it isn't until the citizens see the repercussions for pursuing that kind of an agenda that they, I think, ultimately will come to the point that that type of politics and those kind of leaders are not in their long-term best interests. Maybe we didn't move on that quick enough. And I can understand why, countries that are members of the Union, you're slow to engage too directly or too quickly in the hope that an electoral cycle will change things. But I certainly believe that the EPP have a lot to answer for not striking a blow to Orbán at an earlier stage. But I think, Guy Verhofstadt as our leader in the European Parliament, on a weekly basis, calls out these people, particularly when they come to the European Parliament. And prior to that, there was always a kind of a gentleman's agreement that whilst you might disagree, you didn't do so in public. I think for anyone that follows social media or gets an opportunity to see Guy Verhofstadt's contributions in Parliament, they're always direct, they're challenging, and they go beyond just the basic respectful interactions. He says it as it is, and I think we all have to continue to do that as we move ahead. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm getting the look that it's time to move on to the next section. Thank you so much for affording me an opportunity to come and share with you some of my thoughts and some of the experiences of Ireland. To wish you well in your deliberations, to welcome you officially to the ALDE family, and to look forward to an ongoing dialogue with you and your participation, hopefully, within the institutions of the European Union over the coming months and years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.